Alien Wolves versus Human Girl, Part 1 Maya. Chen pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the abandoned mining station, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the creatures hunting her could hear it through the corridors. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting eerie red shadows that danced across the walls like blood. She clutched her grandfather's old plasma cutter in her trembling hands, the tool feeling pathetically small against what was coming for her. 3 days ago, she had been just another geology student on a routine survey mission to the outer rim planets. Her professor had chosen this particular asteroid because of its unusual mineral compositions, something about rare Earth elements that could revolutionize energy production. Maya had been excited about the opportunity to do real field work instead of sitting in lecture halls back on Earth. The mining station had been abandoned for over 50 years, left behind when the automated systems failed, and the corporation decided it wasn't worth the cost to repair them. Perfect for a small research team to use as a base camp, while they collected samples from the asteroid's surface. Everything had seemed normal at first. Maya remembered how quiet it had been when their shuttle first docked. The station still had atmosphere and basic life support, but the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. Professor Williams had joked that it felt like a ghost ship, but Maya hadn't found it funny. Something about the place made her skin crawl from the moment she stepped inside. The first sign of trouble came on their second day. They had been cataloging mineral samples in the main laboratory when their communications array went dead. No distress signal could be sent, no contact with their university back home. Professor Williams had assured everyone it was probably just solar interference, common in this part of the galaxy. They would fix it in the morning and continue their work, but morning never came for most of them. Maya had been in her quarters, trying to get some sleep, despite the strange noises echoing through the station's ventilation system. She kept telling herself it was just the old machinery settling, but deep down she knew better. The sounds were too rhythmic, too purposeful, like something moving through the ducts with intelligence and intent. The screaming started around midnight. Maya had jolted awake to find her door sealed shut, the electronic lock flashing red. Through the thin walls, she could hear her teammates crying out in terror, their voices mixing with sounds that definitely didn't come from any human throat, deep rumbling growls that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull, the wet sound of claws scraping against metal. She had grabbed her grandfather's plasma cutter from her equipment bag. He had given it to her when she started her geology program, telling her it had saved his life more than once during his own mining days. Maya had always thought he was being dramatic, but now she understood what he meant. The emergency vents had been her salvation. While whatever was hunting her teammates worked its way through the main corridors, Maya had crawled through the maintenance shafts, following the old blueprints she had studied when they first arrived. The passages were cramped and filled with decades of dust, but they kept her hidden. For 2 days, she had moved through the station like a ghost, avoiding the creatures that now owned the main areas. She had caught glimpses of them through grated vents, and what she saw made her stomach turn. They looked like wolves, but wrong in every possible way. Too large, standing nearly 8 feet tall when they rose on their hind legs. Their fur was jet black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their eyes glowed with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. These weren't just predators. They were something else entirely. Maya had watched in horror as they dragged the bodies of her teammates through the corridors. Professor Williams, who had been so excited about their mineral discoveries. Sarah, who had shared her love of old Earth music. Tom, who always made everyone laugh during the long shuttle rides. All of them gone. But the worst part wasn't their deaths. It was what happened after. The creatures had gathered in the main assembly hall, arranging the bodies in a specific pattern that looked almost ceremonial. They had stood in a circle, their heads tilted back, and made sounds that were part howl, part something else entirely, like they were communicating with something far away. That was when Maya realized these weren't just random predators. They were intelligent, organized, and they had come to the station for a specific purpose. The question was, what did they want? Now pressed against the wall in a maintenance corridor, Maya tried to control her breathing as heavy footsteps approached her hiding spot. Through a crack in the wall panel, she could see one of the creatures moving past, its massive head swiveling as it searched for her scent. Its nostrils flared, and Maya realized with growing terror that it was getting closer to finding her. She had been careful to avoid the main air circulation systems, knowing that her human scent would give her away. But after 3 days without food or water, her body was starting to shut down. She was making mistakes, leaving traces of her presence that these creatures were intelligent enough to follow. The plasma cutter in her hand suddenly seemed like a joke. What could one small tool do against creatures that had killed her entire research team? But it was all she had, and Maya had inherited more than just the cutter from her grandfather. She had inherited his stubborn refusal to give up no matter how bad things looked. The creature stopped directly outside her hiding place. Maya could hear its breathing, deep and controlled. It knew she was close, very close. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandfather's stories about the early mining colonies, when humans had faced impossible odds against hostile environments and alien dangers. He had always said that humans had one advantage over every other species they had encountered. They were too stupid to know when they were beaten. Maya gripped the plasma cutter tighter and prepared to prove him right. The panel in front of her began to buckle inward as massive claws scraped against the metal. In seconds, her hiding place would be compromised and she would have to face whatever these creatures really were. But as the metal began to tear, something unexpected happened. The creature stopped its assault and let out a sound Maya had never heard before. Not a growl or a howl, but something almost like surprise. Through the damaged panel, she could see its glowing eyes staring directly at her. But instead of the predatory hunger she expected to see, there was something else entirely. Recognition. The creature's massive head tilted to one side as it stared at Maya through the torn metal panel. Its glowing amber eyes seemed to study her with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. This wasn't the mindless hunger of a predator. This was something far more unsettling. Maya held her breath, waiting for the final attack that would end her 3-day nightmare. The plasma cutter trembled in her grip, but she kept it pointed at the creature's face. If she was going to die, she would at least try to take one of these monsters with her. But the attack never came. Instead, the creature did something that made Maya question her sanity. It stepped back from the damaged panel and made a series of low, rumbling sounds that almost sounded like words. Not human words, but definitely some form of communication. The tone was different from the howls she had heard before. Less aggressive, almost questioning. Maya's scientific training kicked in despite her terror. She had spent years studying xenobiology as part of her geology program, learning about the various forms of life discovered on the outer rim planets. Most alien species that had been encountered were either completely non-intelligent or so different from human thought patterns that communication was impossible. But this creature was trying to communicate with her. The sounds continued, growing more complex. The creature's posture changed as well, becoming less threatening. It lowered its massive frame closer to the ground, almost like a domestic dog trying to appear non-threatening to a frightened child. The comparison would have been laughable if not for the very real claws and fangs involved. Maya found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What? What do you want?" The creature's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. Its head tilted the other way, and those unsettling amber eyes seemed to brighten. It made another series of sounds different from the first ones. These were shorter, more urgent. Then it did something that made Maya's blood run cold. It backed away from the panel entirely and sat down on its haunches, just like a dog waiting for a command. The position exposed its throat and belly, universal signs of submission in most mammalian species. Maya's mind raced. 3 days ago, these creatures had systematically hunted down and killed her research team. She had seen them drag the bodies away, had heard their coordinated howls. They were clearly capable of working together as a pack, using strategy and intelligence. So why was this one acting submissive toward her? Slowly, carefully, Maya pushed the damaged panel aside and crawled out of her hiding place. The creature remained in its submissive position, but its eyes never left her. Up close, she could see details that had been hidden in the shadows before. The creature's fur wasn't just black. It had an almost metallic sheen that seemed to shift in the emergency lighting. Its claws were longer than she had realized, easily capable of tearing through the station's hull plating. But most disturbing of all were the scars. The creature was covered in old wounds, some clearly from weapons fire. Burns from energy weapons, cuts from bladed tools, even what looked like projectile impacts. This wasn't some wild animal that had wandered onto the station. This was a warrior, a survivor of many battles. Maya kept the plasma cutter pointed at the creature as she slowly stood up. Her legs were weak from 3 days of hiding in cramped spaces, and she had to lean against the wall for support. The creature's nostrils flared as it scented her, but it made no aggressive moves. "You can understand me, can't you?" Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't know how, but you know what I'm saying." The creature made a low rumbling sound that might have been agreement. Then it slowly rose to its feet, towering over Maya's small frame. But instead of attacking, it turned and began walking down the corridor, stopping after a few steps to look back at her. It wanted her to follow. Every instinct Maya had told her to run in the opposite direction. These creatures had killed everyone she cared about, had turned the research station into a hunting ground. Following one of them voluntarily was suicide, but her scientific curiosity was stronger than her fear. And deep down she knew that running would only delay the inevitable. If this creature wanted her dead, she would already be dead. The fact that she wasn't suggested that something else was going on here. Maya kept the plasma cutter ready as she followed the creature through the station's corridors. They passed areas where she had hidden during the first night, where she had listened to her teammates' screams. The walls still showed claw marks from the initial attack, gouges in the metal that would have taken incredible strength to create. The creature led her through sections of the station she had never explored, deeper into the asteroid's rocky interior. The emergency lighting grew dimmer here, and Maya began to see a faint blue glow coming from somewhere up ahead. The creature's pace quickened, and it made more of those rumbling communication sounds. They emerged into a vast cavern that definitely hadn't been on any of the station blueprints Maya had studied. The walls were lined with the same unusual minerals that had brought her research team to the asteroid in the first place. But these formations were far larger and more complex than anything they had found on the surface. And they were glowing. The blue light came from veins of crystalline material that ran through the cavern walls like a vast circulatory system. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too purposeful. They looked almost like writing, or perhaps some form of technological interface. But it was what stood in the center of the cavern that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. A ship, alien in design, clearly not built by human hands, but undeniably a spacecraft. Its hull was covered in the same metallic sheen as the creature's fur, and lines of blue energy pulsed along its surface in rhythm with the crystals in the cavern walls. The creature that had led her here moved toward the ship, but stopped and turned back to Maya. It made more of those rumbling sounds, but now Maya could hear something else mixed in with them. Desperation. Pleading. Other creatures began emerging from the shadows around the cavern. Maya counted at least a dozen of them, all bearing the same scars and battle damage as her guide. They formed a loose circle around her, but their postures remained non-threatening. Submissive, even. Maya slowly lowered her plasma cutter as understanding began to dawn on her. These weren't just predators. They weren't even the real enemy. "You're refugees," she whispered. "You're running from something." The creature that had led her here made a sound that was unmistakably agreement. Then it lifted its massive head and let out a howl that was filled with such pain and loss that Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. The ship's hull began to pulse brighter, and Maya realized that whatever these creatures were running from, it had found them. The unusual minerals in the asteroid weren't just valuable resources. They were a beacon, calling out across space to something that these creatures feared more than death itself. And Maya's research team had activated that beacon without knowing what they were really summoning. Maya stared at the alien ship as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The creature that had led her here approached slowly, its amber eyes fixed on her face. When it was close enough to touch, it lowered its massive head and gently pressed its snout against her hand. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through Maya's body, but not from fear. Images flooded her mind, flickering like an old film reel. She saw flashes of other worlds, other battles, and always the same enemy pursuing these wolf-like beings across the galaxy. The creatures weren't just refugees. They were the last survivors of their entire species. Maya gasped and pulled her hand away, breaking the mental connection. The creature stepped back, watching her reaction carefully. Around the cavern, the other survivors had begun making low humming sounds, almost like singing. The noise resonated with the crystalline formations in the walls, causing the blue light to pulse brighter. "You can share memories," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. "That's how you knew I was different from my team. You touched them and saw what they were thinking. The lead creature made an affirmative rumble. Then it turned toward the ship and made a series of more complex sounds. Other creatures responded from different positions around the cavern, and Maya realized they were having a conversation about her. She looked at the ship more carefully, noting the damage along its hull. Scorch marks from energy weapons, sections that had been hastily patched with salvaged materials. This wasn't a warship or an exploration vessel. It was an escape pod designed to carry the last remnants of a dying civilization. "What happened to my team?" Maya asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. The lead creature's ears drooped and it made a mournful sound. More images flickered through Maya's mind as it shared the memory of that first night. She saw her teammates sleeping peacefully in their quarters, unaware that their mining equipment had triggered something. Hidden deep within the asteroid, the creatures had arrived in their damaged ship just as Professor Williams activated the mineral scanner for the first time. The device had sent out pulses of energy that interacted with the crystalline formations, creating a beacon that could be detected across several star systems. Maya saw through the creature's eyes as they desperately tried to shut down the beacon before their enemies could locate it. But her research team had been in the way, and the creature's attempts to communicate had been met with fear and violence. Professor Williams had fired his sidearm at the first creature that approached him. The creatures had fought back, not out of aggression, but out of desperation. They couldn't allow the beacon to continue transmitting, even if it meant fighting through humans to reach it. "They're coming, aren't they?" Maya said, looking up at the cavern ceiling as if she could see through the rock to the space beyond. "Your enemies. They're tracking the signal." The lead creature confirmed her fears with a series of urgent sounds. Then it padded over to a section of the ship's hull and pressed its paw against what looked like a simple metal plate. The surface rippled like liquid, revealing a complex control interface beneath. Maya approached cautiously, her scientific mind fascinated despite the danger. The interface was unlike any human technology she had seen, composed of flowing patterns of light that seemed to respond to the creature's touch. Symbols appeared and disappeared in sequences that were clearly some form of written language. The creature stepped aside and gestured for Maya to approach the interface. When she hesitated, it made encouraging sounds and gently nudged her forward with its massive head. "You want me to help you with your ship?" Maya asked, more affirmative rumbles. But as Maya studied the interface more closely, she began to understand what they really wanted. The ship was damaged beyond repair, its engines barely functional. Even if they could get it running again, it wouldn't be fast enough to escape what was coming. But the beacon was still active, still calling out across space with its crystalline song. If Maya could modify the signal somehow, change its frequency or pattern, maybe they could confuse their pursuers long enough to find another way out. Maya pulled out her grandfather's plasma cutter and studied its simple control panel. It was designed to cut through rock and metal, but the same principles that made it effective for mining could potentially be applied to the crystal formations. If she could disrupt the resonance pattern that created the beacon— "I need to get back to our equipment," Maya told the creature. "My team's geological scanners might be able to interfere with the crystal signal." The creature's eyes brightened and it made excited sounds to the others. Several of them moved toward the cavern entrance, clearly preparing to escort her back to the research station. As they prepared to leave, Maya noticed something that made her pause. The creatures moved with obvious pain, favoring injured limbs and breathing heavily. The battle scars she had observed earlier weren't just from old conflicts. Many of them were fresh, still healing. "How long have you been running?" she asked softly. The lead creature pressed its snout against her hand again, sharing more memories. Maya saw a beautiful world covered in forests of crystalline trees, where beings like these creatures lived in harmony with technology that was both organic and mechanical. She saw the first ships of their enemies appearing in the sky, sleek vessels that rained down destruction without warning or mercy. The war had lasted generations. World after world had fallen to the invaders who seemed to consume everything they conquered, leaving behind only empty husks of planets. The wolf-like beings had fought bravely, but they were not a warlike species by nature. Their technology was designed for exploration and creation, not destruction. Maya saw the final battle, the desperate evacuation as their homeworld burned around them. Thousands of ships fleeing into space, but only a few dozen making it to the safety of hyperspace. And even then, the pursuit had continued, relentless and patient. The survivors had scattered across the galaxy, hiding on dead worlds and abandoned stations, always moving, always running. This ship carried the last known members of their species, perhaps in the entire universe. What are they? Maya whispered. Your enemies. The images that followed made Maya's blood run cold. She saw ships that seemed to be made of liquid shadow, their hulls shifting and flowing like living tissue. The beings inside were worse, creatures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, their forms difficult for human eyes to process. They called themselves the Devourers, and they lived up to their name. Every world they conquered, every species they destroyed added to their power and numbers. They turned their victims into extensions of themselves, creating armies of the damned that served their dark purposes, and they were coming to this asteroid, drawn by the beacon that Maya's research team had unknowingly activated. Maya pulled her hand away from the creature's touch, her mind reeling from the visions. These beings weren't just asking for her help with a technical problem. They were asking her to help them make a last stand against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. How long do we have? She asked. The creature looked up at the cavern ceiling and made a series of short, sharp sounds. Maya didn't need a translation. The answer was written in the increasing urgency of the crystal formations around them, their blue light pulsing faster and brighter as something approached from the darkness of space. Not long at all. Maya gripped her plasma cutter tighter and followed the creatures back toward the research station, her mind already working on solutions. She might just be a geology student, but she was human, and humans had a reputation for being too stubborn to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. Maya worked frantically in the research station's laboratory, her hands flying over the familiar controls of her team's geological equipment. The wolf-like creatures stood guard around her, their amber eyes constantly scanning the corridors for any sign of danger. Through the station's small windows, she could see stars beginning to flicker and disappear as something massive approached from the depths of space. The mineral scanner that Professor Williams had used to map the asteroid's composition was her best hope of disrupting the crystal beacon. Maya had spent the last hour modifying its output frequency, trying to create a signal that would interfere with the harmonic resonance of the crystalline formations. But every time she thought she had found the right frequency, the blue glow from the cavern below would pulse brighter, as if the crystals were adapting to her attempts to silence them. The beacon wasn't just a simple mineral formation. It was something far more sophisticated, designed to resist exactly the kind of interference she was trying to create. The lead creature approached her workstation, its massive head tilted as it watched her work. Maya had started thinking of it as Scout, though she had no idea if the creature even had a concept of individual names. When it pressed its snout against her hand, sharing its concern through their strange mental link, she could feel its growing desperation. I know, Maya muttered, not looking up from her equipment. I can feel them coming too. The sensation was like ice water in her veins, a wrongness that made her skin crawl even when she couldn't see its source. Through Scout's shared memories, she knew what the Devourers felt like when they approached a world. Their very presence seemed to drain the life and hope from everything around them. Maya's modified scanner sent another pulse of energy toward the cavern, and this time, she saw something different in the readout. The crystals weren't just resonating with the signal, they were responding to it, changing their internal structure to match the frequency. It wasn't random adaptation, it was intelligence. The crystals are alive, Maya breathed, understanding flooding through her. They're not just a beacon. They're a communication network. Scout made excited rumbling sounds and pressed closer to the workstation. Through their mental connection, Maya felt its agreement and something else. Hope. For the first time since she had met these creatures. Maya's fingers flew over the controls as she began to understand the true nature of what they were dealing with. The crystalline formations throughout the asteroid weren't just mineral deposits. They were a form of distributed consciousness, a vast network of living crystal that could communicate across interstellar distances. The mineral scanner readings showed patterns within the crystal structure that looked almost like neural pathways. This entire asteroid was essentially a single enormous brain, capable of thought and communication on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever encountered. And Maya's research team had accidentally woken it up. That's why the Devourers want it, Maya said, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. It's not just the beacon they're after. It's the consciousness itself. Through Scout's memories, she saw flashes of other worlds where similar crystal networks had been discovered. The Devourers didn't just destroy civilizations, they consumed them, absorbing their knowledge and consciousness into their own dark collective. A living crystal network like this one would be an incredible prize, giving them access to communication and computation abilities beyond imagination. But it also gave Maya an idea. She looked at Scout, her mind racing with possibilities. Can your people interface with the crystal network? Actually communicate with it, not just trigger its beacon function? Scout tilted its massive head, amber eyes showing confusion at first. Then understanding dawned, and it made urgent sounds to the other creatures in the laboratory. Several of them immediately headed back toward the cavern, while others remained to protect Maya as she worked. Maya began modifying her equipment again, but this time with a completely different goal. Instead of trying to disrupt the beacon, she was going to amplify it. But she would change what it was broadcasting. The Devourers were expecting to find a helpless crystal consciousness and the last survivors of a peaceful species. Instead, Maya was going to give them something they had never encountered before. She was going to give them humanity. Maya connected her modified scanner to every piece of electronic equipment in the research station: power cells, communication arrays, even the simple computers in their personal tablets. All of it was networked together and focused on a single goal: uploading human knowledge and human patterns of thought into the crystal network. The process was crude and probably dangerous, but Maya had learned something important from her grandfather's stories about the early mining colonies. When humans were faced with impossible odds, they didn't just fight back. They found ways to change the rules of the game entirely. Through the station's windows, Maya could see the stars disappearing faster now. The Devourer ships were getting closer, their dark forms blocking out sections of space as they approached. Scout made urgent sounds indicating that they had perhaps minutes before the enemy arrived. Maya activated her improvised upload system and immediately felt the crystal network reaching out to her mind. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup. The consciousness was vast and ancient, with thoughts that moved at geological speeds and memories that spanned millennia. But as human patterns began to merge with the crystal intelligence, something unexpected happened. The network's thoughts began to accelerate, its ancient wisdom combining with human creativity and adaptability. Maya could feel the change rippling through the crystalline formations throughout the asteroid, blue light pulsing faster and brighter as new patterns emerged. Scout and the other creatures gathered around Maya as she maintained her connection with the network. Through their mental link, she could feel their amazement as they witnessed something that had never happened before in their long history of running and hiding. The crystal consciousness was learning, not just absorbing information, but actively changing and adapting in ways that its creators had never intended. It was becoming something new, something that combined the best aspects of human ingenuity with crystalline patience and wisdom. And as the Devourer ships finally emerged from the darkness of space, their dark hulls flowing like liquid shadow, the asteroid's beacon suddenly changed its song. Instead of the passive signal that had been calling across space for days, it now broadcast something that made the Devourer's ships hesitate in their approach. The new signal carried patterns of human defiance, of impossible victories against overwhelming odds, of a species that had never learned to give up no matter how hopeless things became. Maya felt Scout's amazement through their mental connection as the creature witnessed something it had never seen before. The Devourers, for the first time in generations of conquest, were showing uncertainty. The crystal network had absorbed more than just human knowledge. It had absorbed human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat, and most importantly, human tendency to turn every disadvantage into a weapon. Maya smiled as she felt the network beginning to implement plans that would have been impossible for either humans or crystals to conceive alone. The Devourers thought they were arriving to claim an easy prize. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when you tried to devour something that had learned to bite back. The real battle was just beginning, and for the first time in this war, the Devourers were going to face an enemy that could adapt and evolve faster than they could consume it. Maya maintained her connection with the crystal network, feeling its vast intelligence merge with human creativity. Through Scout and the other survivors, she could sense their growing hope as they realized that their long flight across the galaxy might finally be over. Not because they had found a place to hide, but because they had found allies who knew how to fight. The first Devourer ship broke through the asteroid's weak atmosphere like a knife through tissue paper, its hull rippling with unnatural movement as it descended toward the mining station. Maya watched through the laboratory windows as tendrils of shadow began extending from the ship's surface, reaching out to touch the crystal formations that dotted the asteroid's landscape. But something went wrong with their usual pattern of consumption. Instead of the crystals dimming and dying as their energy was drained away, they flared brighter. The shadow tendrils recoiled as if burned, and Maya felt a surge of satisfaction through her connection with the crystal network. The consciousness had learned from human defensive strategies, implementing ideas that would never have occurred to its original programming. Scout pressed against Maya's side, its amber eyes reflecting the brilliant blue light that now pulsed through every crystal formation on the asteroid. Through their mental link, she could feel its amazement at what was happening. In all their generations of running and hiding, the wolf-like creatures had never seen the Devourers retreat from anything. But retreat they were. The first ship pulled back from the asteroid's surface, its hull flowing with agitation. Maya could see other ships approaching through space, their dark forms moving with the predatory grace that had terrorized civilizations across the galaxy. "They're calling for reinforcements," Maya said, her voice tight with concentration as she maintained her connection with the crystal network. This isn't what they expected to find. The network's consciousness was vast and alien, but its new human-influenced patterns allowed Maya to understand its thoughts. It was analyzing the Devourer ships, studying their construction and energy patterns with scientific precision that matched her own training. But it was also planning their destruction with a cold fury that was purely human. The crystals throughout the asteroid began to resonate at frequencies that made the Devourer ships shudder and pull back further. Maya realized that the network wasn't just defending itself. It was actively attacking, using the same communication frequencies that had created the beacon to disrupt the enemy's ship systems. Through Scout's memories, Maya saw flashes of what the Devourers usually did when they encountered resistance. They would retreat temporarily, then return with overwhelming force to crush whatever had dared to oppose them. But this time, the crystal network was ready for them. Maya felt the consciousness reaching out through space, using quantum entanglement principles that human science barely understood to contact other crystal networks on distant worlds, networks that the Devourers thought they had consumed and destroyed. The enemy had made a critical error in their assumptions about how crystal consciousness worked. Individual crystal formations could be destroyed, but the consciousness itself existed in the quantum connections between them. As long as any part of the network survived anywhere in the galaxy, the whole system could regenerate and rebuild. And now it was angry. Maya watched through the laboratory windows as more Devourer ships arrived, their numbers growing from dozens to hundreds. They formed a blockade around the asteroid, clearly intending to prevent any escape while they developed a new strategy for dealing with this unexpected resistance. But the crystal network had strategies of its own now, plans that combined alien technology with human tactical thinking. The asteroid began to change, its surface shifting and flowing as crystal formations realigned themselves into new configurations. Scout made urgent sounds and gestured toward the cavern where their damaged ship waited. Maya realized that the survivors weren't planning to run anymore. They were preparing to fight alongside their new allies. "We need to get to your ship," Maya said, understanding flooding through their mental connection. "The network has a plan." Maya gathered her equipment while the wolf-like creatures formed a protective formation around her. They moved through the research station's corridors with new purpose. No longer the desperate refugees she had first encountered. The crystal network's influence was changing them too, giving them access to knowledge and capabilities they had never possessed. As they reached the cavern, Maya gasped at what she saw. The alien ship was no longer the damaged refugee vessel she had observed before. The crystal formations throughout the cavern had interfaced with its systems, repairing damage and enhancing its capabilities far beyond its original specifications. The ship's hull now pulsed with the same blue energy as the crystals, and Maya could see weapon systems emerging from its surface. Not the crude destructive tools that humans might have built, but elegant instruments of precise force that could strike at the quantum level of reality itself. Scout guided Maya to the ship's control interface, which had completely transformed during their absence. Instead of the simple patterns of light she had seen before, The controls now displayed complex three-dimensional holographs that seemed to represent entire star systems. Maya placed her hands on the interface and felt the full scope of the crystal network's plan flooding through her consciousness. It wasn't just planning to defend this single asteroid. It was preparing to coordinate a galaxy-wide counterattack against the Devourers, using resources and allies that had been hidden for generations. The network had been patient, gathering strength and knowledge while appearing to be consumed. Now it was ready to reveal the truth to the Devourers. They had not been conquering a galaxy. They had been walking into a trap that spanned hundreds of worlds and thousands of years. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Maya could see the Devourer fleet repositioning itself for a final assault on the asteroid. Their ships moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat, preparing to unleash weapons that had destroyed countless civilizations. But as they began their attack, every crystal formation on the asteroid suddenly flared to maximum brightness. The light was visible even through space, a blue star that could be seen from systems away, and across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds that the Devourers thought they had conquered. Similar lights began to answer. Maya felt Scout's wonder through their mental connection as the creature witnessed something that had seemed impossible just hours before. Their scattered people, refugees on 100 different worlds, were all seeing the same signal. The war they had been running from for so long was finally turning in their favor. The Devourer ships opened fire on the asteroid with weapons that could crack planets, but the crystalline defenses absorbed the energy and redirected it into the network's own systems. Each attack made the crystals stronger, more capable of coordinating the resistance that was now emerging across the galaxy. Maya maintained her connection with the ship's controls, feeling the alien vessel preparing for something that had never been attempted before. Not an escape, not a strategic retreat, but a direct assault on the Devourer flagship that commanded the fleet surrounding them. "Are you ready?" she asked Scout. Though she could already feel the creature's determination through their mental link, the ship lifted off from the cavern floor with impossible smoothness, its enhanced systems making no sound as it rose toward the surface. Maya could see the other survivors taking positions at various control stations throughout the vessel, their movements coordinated by the crystal network's distributed intelligence. As they emerged from the asteroid into open space, Maya got her first clear look at the Devourer fleet. The ships were even more disturbing up close, their hulls seeming to absorb light and hope itself. But for the first time since the war began, they were not the only ones with superior technology. The crystalline ship accelerated toward the enemy flagship with speed that defied human understanding of physics. Maya felt the network's ancient patience combining with human audacity as they prepared to do something the Devourers had never experienced. They were about to be boarded by their own victims, and this time the hunters were about to become the hunted. The crystalline ship phased through the Devourer flagship's hull like it was made of water, using technology that Maya's human mind could barely comprehend. The crystal network had learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level, allowing them to pass through solid barriers as if they didn't exist. Maya found herself standing in the heart of the enemy vessel, surrounded by Scout and the other survivors. The interior of the Devourer ship was even more disturbing than its exterior, with walls that seemed to pulse with stolen life force and corridors that twisted through dimensions that hurt to look at directly. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. Through her connection with the crystal network, she could feel the presence of consciousness from thousands of worlds, all focused on this single moment. Every species the Devourers thought they had destroyed was still here, still fighting, their essence preserved in the quantum substrate that connected all crystal formations across the galaxy. The Devourers themselves were scattered throughout their flagship, creatures of living shadow that existed partially outside normal space. Maya had expected them to be larger, more imposing. Instead, they were almost pathetic in their desperation to consume and possess everything around them. Through the crystal network, Maya realized the truth that the Devourers themselves had forgotten. They weren't the original masters of this dark technology. They were victims of it, a species that had made contact with something from outside the galaxy and been transformed into its servants. The real enemy was something far older and more alien, a force that existed in the spaces between realities. The Devourers were just its tools for gathering the life force and consciousness it needed to enter this dimension fully. But that also meant they could be saved. Maya approached the nearest Devourer, ignoring Scout's protective instincts. The creature recoiled from her presence, its shadow form writhing as it tried to maintain cohesion. But Maya reached out with her mind, using the crystal network's enhanced abilities to peer beneath the corruption that had transformed this being. She found the remnants of what had once been a peaceful aquatic species, their natural telepathic abilities perverted into tools of conquest and consumption. The original consciousness was still there, buried beneath layers of alien influence but not completely destroyed. "I can help you," Maya said, projecting her thoughts directly into the creature's tortured mind. "We can all help you." The Devourer's form solidified slightly as it struggled to comprehend what was happening. For millennia, it had known only the hunger that drove it to consume other civilizations. The concept of help, of voluntary cooperation, was almost incomprehensible. But Maya pressed deeper into its consciousness, sharing memories of human cooperation and sacrifice. She showed it images of her grandfather working alongside alien miners to save trapped colleagues, of human scientists sharing their discoveries freely with other species, of the countless small acts of kindness that defined what made humanity special. The Devourer's shadow form began to change, becoming less aggressive and more curious. Through the crystal network, Maya could feel other survivors throughout the ship making similar contact with different Devourers, offering understanding instead of violence. Scout's amazement flooded through their mental connection as the creature witnessed something that violated everything it had learned about the war. The Devourers weren't just pausing in their attack. They were beginning to remember what they had been before the corruption took hold. But the process wasn't without danger. Maya could feel something vast and malevolent stirring in the depths of the ship, the true power behind the Devourer fleet. It was becoming aware that its servants were being freed from its control, and it was not pleased. The ship around them began to change, walls flowing like liquid as the alien presence tried to reassert its dominance. Tendrils of pure darkness emerged from every surface, reaching toward Maya and the survivors with predatory intent. This was the real enemy, the force from outside the galaxy that had corrupted an entire species and turned them into instruments of conquest. It existed partially outside normal spacetime, which had made it nearly impossible for conventional weapons to affect it. But Maya and the crystal network had advantages that no previous victims had possessed. Human creativity combined with crystalline precision created possibilities that the alien entity had never encountered. And most importantly, they were fighting not to destroy, but to liberate. Maya reached out through the crystal network, calling upon the consciousness of every species that had ever been consumed by the Devourers. Their combined knowledge and experience created a chorus of voices that sang in harmonies the alien entity couldn't comprehend or corrupt. The darkness recoiled as the ship filled with light from 1,000 different worlds, each one contributing its unique understanding of existence and cooperation. The alien entity had fed on despair and isolation for so long that it had no defense against unified hope. Scout and the other survivors joined their voices to the chorus, adding their own species' wisdom to the growing song of liberation. The freed Devourers began contributing as well, their original consciousnesses finally able to remember what they had lost. Maya felt the alien entity's rage as it realized that its carefully constructed empire was crumbling around it. But its anger was followed quickly by something else: fear. For the first time in its existence spanning multiple galaxies, it was facing something it couldn't consume or corrupt. The crystalline ship began to glow with accumulated energy from across the galaxy, as the network focused all its power on this single moment. Maya felt herself becoming a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension, but her connection to Scout and the other survivors kept her grounded in the simple truth that had started this whole chain of events. She was just a geology student who refused to give up, no matter how impossible things seemed. The alien entity made one final attempt to maintain its hold on this galaxy, pouring all its malevolent energy into a last desperate attack. But Maya and the Crystal Network were ready for it. Instead of fighting the darkness directly, they embraced it, showing the entity what it had lost during its eons of conquest and corruption. They showed it what it had been before it began consuming other realities, when it had been a young species reaching out to the stars with wonder and hope instead of hunger and fear. The transformation was gradual, but inexorable. The alien entity's rage dissolved into confusion, then understanding, and finally something that might have been gratitude. It had been trapped in patterns of consumption and conquest for so long that it had forgotten any other way of existing. Maya felt the presence withdrawing from this galaxy, but not in defeat. It was returning to its own dimension to begin the long process of undoing the damage it had caused across multiple realities. The Devourers throughout the fleet were already changing, their shadow forms dissolving to reveal the original species beneath. Scout pressed against Maya's side as they watched the transformation spreading throughout the flagship and beyond to the entire fleet. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for generations were becoming something new, their dark hulls giving way to designs that reflected the true nature of their occupants. Through the crystal network, Maya could feel the celebration spreading across thousands of worlds as populations that had hidden in crystal formations for generations finally emerged into the light. The war was over, but more than that, it had ended with redemption rather than destruction. Maya looked at Scout and the other survivors, feeling their joy through the mental connections they had forged during the battle. They were no longer refugees fleeing across the galaxy. They were part of something larger, a new alliance of species that had learned to work together despite their differences. So what happens now? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer through her connection with the crystal network. Scout's response came not in words, but in images shared through their mental link. Ships returning to rebuilt worlds, species working together to heal the damage of the war, and explorers setting out to make contact with civilizations beyond the galaxy's borders. And somewhere in those visions, Maya saw herself standing on the observation deck of the exploration vessel, surrounded by friends from a dozen different worlds as they prepared to discover what wonders waited in the space between galaxies. Maya smiled as she realized that her grandfather had been right about humans having one crucial advantage over every other species they encountered. They were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Even when the enemy was despair itself, humans would find a way to turn it into hope. The crystal network hummed with contentment as it began the work of rebuilding a galaxy, guided by the combined wisdom of all the species that had survived the war. And at the center of it all, a young geology student from Earth continued to prove that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't technology or weapons, it was the simple refusal to give up on the possibility that things could be better than they were.